Not all pickleball paddle shapes are created equal. In fact, the shape you're using could be hurting your game. Most players don't realize the advantages and disadvantages of certain shapes. So, let's dive in. First, we're going to talk about a unique rule in pickleball that isn't that well known. Paddles cannot have a length plus width that exceeds 24 inches. So companies have a limited amount of dimensions that they can actually work with when designing a paddle. There's also an interesting rule that paddles can be no longer than 17 inches in length. So this would mean that if you made your paddle 17 inches long, the max width you would be allowed to have is 7 inches. And as one other example, if you had a paddle that was 16.25 inches in length, then that would mean you have 7.75 inches in width to max out the allowed 24-inch dimensions. Now that you know this rule, let's talk about what the 3 to 4 most common shapes in pickleball are. First, we have wide body paddles, which are also sometimes called standard shapes, and some people even like to categorize them as two different things, but most of the time when people call something a standard shaped paddle, they're referring to a square shaped paddle that is 16 inches in length and 8 inches wide. And then anything wider than 8 inches is called a wide body paddle. Personally, I find that most people end up using these words interchangeably, but sometimes it is good to understand the differences and why people might be calling one a standard or one a wide body. Then you have elongated paddles, which are commonly 16.5 inches in length and 7.5 inches wide. Then there's one that almost no one uses, and it's really not that common to find on the market, but just in case you want to know what it is, there's also the extra elongated paddle, which would be those paddles that are above 16.5 inches in length all the way to 17 inches. Finally, you have the hybrid shape, which is an in-between of a standard shape and an elongated paddle. These are usually 16.25 inches in length and 7.75 inches wide. Now, while those are the standard ranges of length and width for each shape, there are paddles out there that do have some unique dimensions, and they don't always conform to the ones that I just mentioned. However, all you really need to know is that the most common shapes you will experience when purchasing a paddle is a wide body, a standard, a hybrid, and an elongated. Now you might be wondering, how does someone choose which shape they should use? And it's gonna be different for every person, but let's go through each shape and explain their pros and cons. Starting with elongated paddles, these excel in giving a player a longer reach. They also usually hit harder as well due to being longer and having more leverage. However, in the last year or so, hybrid and wide body paddles have gotten much more powerful and poppy than they had been in the past. I think the edge will always go to the elongated paddle in terms of power, but it's not as big of a selling point as it used to be years ago. The next advantage of elongated paddles is that some of them have very long 6-inch plus handles. You will almost never see this in another shape because to do that, you would give up so much face area that it isn't worth the trade-off. So if you are a player with larger hands, the elongated shape is the best place to find a longer handle paddle. Now, the downsides are that they tend to have sweet spots that are smaller and higher up on the face. And because the paddles are longer, they're often harder to maneuver when compared to other shapes, which basically just means they feel heavier and harder to swing. Tennis players coming into pickleball tend to prefer the elongated shape because it is the shape that best matches their tennis racket. And since they're used to swinging a heavier racket, elongated paddles often don't feel that hard to swing to them since it's a lot lighter than a tennis racket. Next, we have the wide body and standard shaped paddle. These are almost the opposite of what an elongated paddle is. They have less reach, but what you gain for that lack of reach is a much more maneuverable paddle. These can be particularly good at generating fast acceleration on short, compact swings at the net like a counter. These are also more stable, which leads them to having much larger sweet spots than elongated paddles. These can be particularly great for defensive players who excel at resetting the ball. Historically, wide body paddles have had very short handles, but over the years, as the two-handed backhand has become more and more popular, the handle lengths have started to increase to 5.25 inches all the way up to 5.6 inches. People who would enjoy wide body paddles are people who want paddles that are easier to swing, table tennis players who like to choke up on the face, or defensive players since you have such a large sweet spot to work with. Now, hybrids are unique because they try and combine elements of an elongated paddle and a wide body. They usually give up a 1/4 inch in length and add it to the width to make the paddle a little bit more stable. This can give you a similar feeling to an elongated paddle, but with the extra stability, making the paddle feel like it has a better sweet spot. These strike a good balance between reach, sweet spot, and hand speed at the net. Hybrids have only just started started to get more popular over the last several years of play, and not every company offers a hybrid shape yet, but I do think we'll start to see more as the years go on. Now, the con of the hybrid is that it doesn't excel in one specific area like the wide body or elongated paddle. So some people dislike the shape because they would rather the paddle specialize in a specific set of traits rather than be neutral at many. Small fun fact about hybrids: a lot of people believe that anything with the arrow curved head is a hybrid, but that actually isn't how we define hybrid. Hybrids are purely based on the dimensions of the paddle, which are anywhere between 16.15 inches all the way up to about 16.35 inches in length. You could have a paddle with a flat head that is 16.25 inches and that would still be a hybrid. Similarly, you could have an elongated paddle that's 16.5 inches in length with a rounded head, and that would not be called a hybrid. Now that you understand some of the pros and cons, I'm going to make some arguments for each shape and why you would want to consider using it. I'm going to start with the wide body shape, because I think this doesn't get as much love or attention as it probably should. Pickleball is a game where you have to hit a wide variety of shots from different positions on the court. Hand speed is a very important aspect of this game, and at the net, players can speed up at a lot of different spots on your body, and sometimes you're late and don't make clean contact. So, having a paddle that is quick in the hand, stable, and provides a large sweet spot is a huge benefit to most amateur players. I think on average for amateurs, that extra half inch of reach that you gain from elongated paddles isn't going to help you as much as a quicker paddle to swing and a larger sweet spot would. In my opinion, elongated is currently the most popular shape because the sport is still new and largely dominated by former tennis players who are used to the length of a tennis racket. This has led to the elongated shape being more common, and that means less people are starting out on a wide body because there's less of them compared to elongated paddles. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying elongated paddles have no purpose or that every single person should only use one type of shape. What I am saying, though, is that historically, people have just started with an elongated paddle and got used to it, and because wide bodies used to have such short handles, I think a lot of people have overlooked them, even though they have a lot of advantages that I think would help more players than an elongated paddle probably would. One area of pickleball that I think will probably always be better for an elongated paddle is singles. While singles isn't a big part of our sport like it is in tennis, I just don't know that the benefits of a wide body matter in singles. You aren't hitting a lot of resets, you don't need super quick hands since you aren't as close to your opponent at the net, and the stability matters less because shots are more predictable in singles than they are in doubles. Now, if you're someone with low mobility, an elongated paddle may also be very beneficial because of that extra reach that you could gain in doubles. I think elongated paddles are best suited for former tennis players or higher level players looking to maximize reach at the kitchen, as well as power, and don't necessarily struggle with hitting the sweet spot. While it's never been pitched this way, I do think that the elongated shape is the most difficult to use, and I think a lot of amateurs would be better suited with a different shape. However, more advanced players may not have any of those issues with an elongated paddle and may really appreciate the extra reach that they have. Finally, the hybrid. I think the biggest advantage you gain is a similar amount of reach as an elongated paddle, but you do cut down on the swing weight, which can make hybrids noticeably easier to swing than an elongated paddle. So for some players out there, the small sacrifice in reach may be well worth the hand speed that you gain. Hybrids also tend to be more stable than elongated paddles, which is a big plus for amateur players. One additional benefit is that since they're lighter, you have a lot more room to customize them with weighted tape before it might start to get too heavy for you. While they aren't a master of one specific thing, they do excel in bridging the gap between an elongated and a wide body paddle very well. One important note about sweet spot sizes: it's not just about the paddle shape. Tennis players switching to pickleball tend to hit higher on the face because of their muscle memory from tennis, which on a wide body paddle would be closer to the edge guard. This can make it feel like the sweet spot is worse when in reality it's just an adjustment issue. So if you've ever thought a paddle's sweet spot just feels off when switching between different shapes, it might be more about your swing habits and not necessarily the paddle itself. So make sure you give yourself an adequate amount of time to adjust if you are hopping between different shapes.
What was that?
Anyways, now that you know which paddle shape might be best for you, there's one more thing you need to consider, and that's customizing your paddle. If you've never used weighted tape before, check out our guide on screen now.